Welcome to CSS Breakdown, book by book, season '09, episode 11, where we dive into Norman Lowe's Mastering Modern World History, 5th edition, to explore the complex tapestry of conflicts that have shaped the modern Middle East.
Our mission for this deep dive for you, our listener, is to unpack the intricate web of historical factors, external influences, and internal dynamics that have fueled nearly a century of conflict in this absolutely critical region.
That's right, you'll gain a clearer understanding of why these conflicts have persisted, and crucially, what drives the very different perspectives involved. The Middle East has long captured global attention.
Oh, absolutely. Think about its strategic position as a crossroads between continents and its incredibly rich oil resources. That's always key.
Exactly. We're going to explore how major global powers have intervened, alongside the numerous conflicts involving individual Arab states like the civil war in Lebanon, the Iran-Iraq War, and the First Gulf War.
And here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Interpretations of the Middle East situation vary so dramatically depending on whose viewpoint you're looking at. This challenge of perspective is just crucial.
It really is. Our sources highlight, for instance, how Egyptian leader Colonel Nasser was seen by many British politicians as a dangerous fanatic, almost as bad as Hitler.
Yeah, incredibly strong language. Yet on the flip side, most Arabs revered him as a hero, a real symbol of Arab unity and freedom.
That fundamental difference in perception isn't just some historical footnote. It's the very lens through which we have to view the enduring mistrust and, the often failed peace efforts across the region, isn't it?
Absolutely. So what does this all mean for understanding the Middle East? We have to start with two foundational pillars, I'd say.
Hmm.
The powerful, yet often frustrated, dream of Arab unity and the pervasive shadow of outside interference.
Right. Let's tackle that dream first. Pan-Arabism. What unites these diverse nations?
Well, primarily a shared Arabic language, a predominantly Muslim faith. We have to remember Lebanon's significant Christian population, of course, and a common desire, at least historically, to see the destruction of Israel for the return of Palestinian land.
And there were early attempts at union?
There were. As far back as 1931, an Islamic conference in Jerusalem declared, "The Arab lands are a complete and indivisible whole." Strong words. And then the Arab League, founded in 1945, expanded to 20 states by 1980, sort of reflecting this aspiration.
But despite that shared desire, the reality was often quite different, wasn't it? The Arab League, for all its potential, our source says it achieved very little politically.
Yeah, plagued by internal squabbles. Then you have Colonel Nasser of Egypt. After his immense prestige following the 1956 Suez Crisis, he really boosted pan-Arabism.
Right. Didn't Syria actually join Egypt for a time?
It did, the United Arab Republic in 1958, but it dissolved within 3 years. Syrian resentment of Nasser's dominance was a big factor. Post-Nasser, even the Federation of Arab Republics that involved Egypt, Libya, Syria, that also faltered.
So what kept undermining this dream? It wasn't just external meddling, was it?
No, definitely not. Deep internal ideological chasms were just as important. You had conservative monarchies like Jordan and Saudi Arabia often criticized, the source notes, for being pro-British, clashing with nationalist and socialist governments in Egypt and Syria.
And the Israel issue, that was always there.
Always a massive, often unbridgeable wedge. Egypt's separate peace treaty with Israel in 1979 led to its expulsion from the Arab League. That just starkly highlighted these deep divisions. Shared identity alone just wasn't enough to forge lasting political union.
Okay, so that's the internal dynamic. Let's connect this to the other pillar, foreign intervention. That's played a long-standing role, hasn't it?
Oh, profoundly. European involvement stretched back centuries. Britain, for instance, controlled Egypt for decades. And after World War I, Britain and France received mandates over vast areas taken from the defeated Ottoman Turks, basically drawing new lines on the map.
Like Britain getting Iraq and Jordan, and France getting Syria and Lebanon.
Exactly. And this fundamentally shaped future loyalties and, just as importantly, resentments. It really laid the groundwork for future conflicts.
And this region wasn't just a crossroads for empires. It was, and still is, a global energy hub.
Absolutely critical. Once producing over a third of the world's oil supplies, the Middle East became vital for European nations. Their heavy dependence on this oil naturally led them to seek, friendly governments which would sell them oil cheaply.
So the pursuit of cheap oil directly kind of fueled the instability they were trying to manage.
You could certainly argue that. That strategic and economic interest directly fostered a desire for control and influence, which nationalist governments in Arab states bitterly resented.
Which led to pro-Western regimes often being replaced by non-aligned ones, right? trying to be independent from both East and West.
Precisely. We saw this play out dramatically in Egypt. British troops remained in the Suez Canal zone after WWII. Then in 1952, Egyptian army officers overthrew King Farouk. Colonel Nasser became president in 1954, marking the end of direct British influence and sparking the Suez War.
And that pattern repeated elsewhere.
It did. Jordan's King Abdullah, who was essentially put on his throne by the British, was assassinated by nationalists in 1951. His successor, King Hussein, ended the treaty allowing British bases by 1957.
And Iraq.
Similar story. Pro-British leaders King Faisal and Nuri Said signed the Baghdad Pact in 1955, but they were murdered in a coup in 1958. Iraq became a republic, withdrew from the pact, and that pretty much marked the end of Britain's major role there.
Then there's Iran, always a key player, especially with its border with the USSR, a real Cold War battleground.
Definitely. The Shah initially resisted Russian attempts at communist influence, even signed a defense treaty with the USA. But strong nationalist sentiment also resented British control over the Anglo-Iranian oil company.
Right. Premier Mossadegh nationalized the company in 1951.
He did, though that led to an international boycott and his eventual resignation. Later, of course, Ayatollah Khomeini's Islamic Republic in 1979 established a powerful non-aligned stance, which was, in a way, reminiscent of Nasser's earlier ambitions.
Okay, so against this backdrop of frustrated unity and persistent external influence, we turn to the conflict that our source calls the central wound of the region, the Arab-Israeli conflict.
A conflict with roots stretching back, well, almost millennia. The genesis of modern Israel and the 1948-49 war really dates back almost 2,000 years to AD 71 when Jews were driven from Palestine by the Romans.
But the modern tension stems more from the late 19th century.
Yes, 1897, the World Zionist Organization was founded, advocating for a Jewish state in Palestine as a safe refuge from persecution. This, quite understandably, alarmed the Arabs, who considered Palestine their homeland.
And Britain got involved with the 1917 Balfour Declaration, supporting a Jewish national home.
Right. As the mandate holder after 1919, Britain oversaw large Jewish immigration, which led to bitter Arab protests demanding an independent Arab Palestine. Our sources suggest Britain just couldn't reconcile the deep religious gulf between the two sides.
A gulf that only widened, it seems.
It did. Nazi persecution after 1933 spurred even more Jewish immigration. Jews made up about half Palestine's population by 1940. Arab protests turned violent. Then, post-WWII, hundreds of thousands of Jewish refugees from Hitler's Europe desperately needed refuge.
And Jewish groups started using violence too.
Yes, the source mentions a Jewish terrorist campaign against both Arabs and British. Britain, exhausted, passed the problem to the UN. The UN voted for partition in November 1947, setting aside roughly half of Palestine for a Jewish state.
And then the British withdrew in early 1948, and fighting just intensified.
It did. In May 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared Israel's independence and was immediately attacked by a coalition of Arab states: Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon.
And who got the blame for the chaos?
Well, the world largely pointed fingers at Britain. Arabs accused Britain of being pro-Jewish, while Jews accused them of being pro-Arab. U.S. President Truman also faced some blame for pressuring Britain without offering troops.
And the outcome of that first war.
Remarkably, against expectations, Israel won. They captured about 3/4 of Palestine. Many Israelis had gained military experience serving in the British Army during WWII, while the Arab states were divided among themselves and poorly equipped.
But the human cost?
Oh, immense. The source calls the fate of Palestinian Arabs the most tragic outcome. Nearly 1 million became refugees in surrounding countries, living in miserable refugee camps, having lost their homeland. Jerusalem was divided, and the Arab states refused to recognize Israel, viewing the war as only the first round.
Which brings us quite quickly to the Suez War of 1956. Whose fault was that one?
Again, blame varied wildly. Israelis for invading, the communist bloc and Arabs pointed to British-French imperialism. Britain, France, and Israel blamed Nasser for being anti-Western. Most British historians, our source notes, now agree Britain and France probably overreacted using force.
Nasser certainly made some provocative moves, didn't he?
He did. As Egypt's new ruler, he was pushing aggressive Arab unity. He organized Fedayeen, guerrilla fighters, against Israel, blockaded the Gulf of Aqaba, refused to renew the treaty allowing British troops, supported Algerians against France, opposed the Baghdad Pact.
And signed that arms deal with Czechoslovakia.
Right, bringing Soviet military experts to Egypt. That really pushed American buttons.
So the U.S. reacted.
They did. Outraged by the Soviet arms sales, The U.S. canceled a promised grant for the Aswan Dam in July 1956.
And Nasser's response?
Immediate.
Yeah.
He nationalized the Suez Canal, intending to use its income for the dam. He promised compensation, but the shareholders were mostly British and French.
British Prime Minister Eden saw him as another Hitler or Mussolini.
Exactly. Feared united Soviet-influenced Arabia could cut off Europe's vital oil supplies. So secretly, Britain, France, and Israel hatched a plan.
The plan being, Israel invades Sinai, then Britain and France move in to protect the canal.
Pretty much, aiming to restore Anglo-French control and ideally topple Nasser.
But it didn't go according to plan.
Not at all. Israel invaded successfully, British and French forces bombed airfields and landed troops. But the international outcry, especially from the U.S. and USSR, was immense. They demanded an immediate ceasefire.
So Britain, France, and Israel had to withdraw.
They did. It was a complete humiliation for Britain and France. And conversely, a massive triumph for President Nasser.
Yeah.
His prestige soared among ordinary Arabs. British influence in the region just plummeted.
And then Israel.
Despite the forced withdrawal, they inflicted heavy losses on Egypt, stopped the Fedayeen raids for a time, and increasingly looked to the USA as their main supporter.
So that set the stage for the next big one, the Six-Day War of 1967.
Indeed. Arab states, especially Iraq and Syria, under the Ba'ath Party, were again united, publicly at least, with the goal of destroying Israel. Syria supported Palestinian groups like al-Fatah, bombing Israeli settlements from the Golan Heights.
And Nasser.
Riding high from socialist policies in the Aswan Dam project, he massed troops in Sinai and closed the Gulf of Aqaba again. The Russians were encouraging Egypt and Syria, hoping to increase their own influence.
But Israel struck first this time.
They did. Believing they couldn't win a defensive war, Israel launched devastating preemptive airstrikes on June 5th, destroying most of the Egyptian Air Force on the ground.
And the ground war was swift.
Incredibly swift. Israeli troops captured the Gaza Strip and Sinai from Egypt, the rest of Jerusalem and the West Bank from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. A UN ceasefire ended the war in less than a week.
Why are they so successful?
The source points to slow Arab buildup, Israeli air superiority, and just inadequate Arab preparations.
And the results?
A spectacular success for Israel militarily. They ignored a UN order to return the captured territory. These areas became vital buffer zones, but also brought the huge problem of managing about 1 million extra Arabs under Israeli rule.
And for the Arab states?
A profound humiliation, especially for Nasser. It showed they likely needed outside help to defeat Israel. The Russians, despite their earlier encouragement, didn't intervene directly, but did later resupply Egypt and Syria with modern weapons.
Paving the way for the Yom Kippur War in 1973.
Exactly. Several factors led to that. Pressure from the PLO under Yasser Arafat, extreme groups like the PFLP launching terrorist attacks, the airliner hijackings, the Munich Olympics murders in '72 to grab world attention.
And Egypt's new president, Anwar Sadat?
He actually wanted a negotiated peace, hoped for American support, but the U.S. wasn't engaging. So Sadat and Syria decided to attack Israel again, partly hoping to force American mediation. They felt confident with new Russian weapons and training.
So the attack began on October 6, 1973, Yom Kippur.
Right, catching the Israelis completely off guard. Egyptian and Syrian forces had significant early successes, but the Israelis, crucially supplied with American weapons, eventually turned the tide. They held on to the 1967 territories and even crossed the Suez Canal into Egypt proper.
But Sadat's gamble kind of worked.
In a way, yes. It forced the U.S. and USSR to step in and broker a UN ceasefire.
And the outcome brought a glimmer of hope.
A glimmer, yes. Egyptian and Israeli leaders met separately in Geneva. Israel agreed to withdraw from the Suez Canal, which reopened in 1975, though not initially for Israeli ships.
And the oil weapon. That was significant.
Hugely significant. Arab oil-producing states cut supplies to pro-Israel Western nations. This caused severe shortages, contributed to inflation and energy crisis. OPEC raised prices dramatically. It showed the power they held.
Which leads, surprisingly perhaps, to the Camp David Accords and peace between Egypt and Israel in 1978-79. Why did Sadat make that move?
He came to believe Israel could not be destroyed by force. He saw the futility of more wars. He showed, as the source says, great courage, being the first Arab leader to meet Israelis face-to-face, implicitly recognizing Israel's existence. He knew the PLO and hardline states would hate it.
And Israel accepted.
Yes, they were facing economic problems, plus U.S. pressure. President Carter played a vital role getting them to Camp David.
So the treaty was signed in Washington in March 79. What were the key points?
End of the state of war since 1948. Israeli withdrawal from the Sinai Peninsula. Egypt promised not to attack Israel again and guaranteed oil supplies. Israeli ships were allowed through the Suez Canal.
But it wasn't universally welcomed.
Far from it. Condemned by the PLO and most Arab states. And Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin made it clear Israel would never return the Golan Heights to Syria or allow the West Bank to become an independent Palestinian state, calling it a mortal threat.
And the settlements continued.
Yes, resentment mounted among West Bank Arabs over expanding Israeli settlements. Tragically, President Sadat was assassinated in October 1981 by extremist Muslim soldiers who felt he'd betrayed the Arab cause.
But his successor continued the agreement.
Yes, Hosni Mubarak did. The Arab-Disraeli feud was then somewhat overshadowed by the Iran-Iraq War in the 80s. But then, in December 1987, the first intifada erupted.
The shaking off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Massive demonstrations by Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, a civil disobedience campaign against repressive Israeli policies and the brutal behavior of Israeli troops. It lasted over 3 years and brought Israel significant international condemnation.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly. Beyond the core Arab-Israeli conflict, there were other major wars. Lebanon's civil war, for instance. That lasted a long time.
15 years, starting in 1975. Lebanon was formerly Ottoman, then a French mandate until independence in 1945. It actually prospered initially as a banking and trade hub.
But the underlying tensions were always there.
Always. A bewildering mixture, the source calls it, of Christian groups, Maronites, Greek Orthodox, Catholics, Armenians, and Muslim groups, Shia, Sunni, Druze. Deep-seated hatreds existed, like between Aaronites and Druze. The Constitution tried to balance power, but
It wasn't enough, and the Palestinian refugees complicated things further.
massively. Over 500,000 by 1975. Their constant frontier clashes with Israel provoked Israeli retaliation in southern Lebanon. Being left-wing and Muslim, they alarmed the conservative Maronites, who saw them as a dangerous, destabilizing influence. Plus, the PLO had its headquarters there, which inevitably drew in Syria.
And he sparked in 75.
A seemingly minor dispute over fishing rights escalated. Palestinians sided with Muslims, right-wing Christian phalange attacked Palestinians, and boom, civil war. Maronites wanted to expel the Palestinians who allied with the Druze. Both sides blamed each other for the escalating violence.
Then Syria intervened in 76.
Yes, President Assad sent troops, primarily to control the PLO. It restored some order, but effectively meant Syria now controlled Lebanon.
But the chaos didn't really end, did it? Especially in the 80s.
No, it became even more complex. Fighting in southern Lebanon between Palestinians and Christians led to Israeli intervention, creating a buffer zone. Then in 1982, after a Palestinian attack, Israel invaded Lebanon all the way to Beirut, bombing refugee camps like Sabra and Shatila. The PLO was expelled.
There was a multinational force for a while.
Yes, U.S., French, Italian, British troops. But they withdrew after devastating suicide bombings against their barracks. Alliances kept shifting, Shia Mal militia fighting Druze, then Shia and Druze fighting each other. Arafat rearmed Palestinians. Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed Shia group, emerged. Hostages were taken. Syrian troops re-entered West Beirut in 87. Just a tangled mess.
Were there efforts towards peace eventually?
Yes. Constitutional changes in 1990 gave Muslims fairer representation. Syrian help restored some government authority, disbanded most militias. Hostages were released. But a 1991 Syrian-Lebanese treaty was seen by Israel as virtual annexation. Israeli troops only fully left southern Lebanon in 2000.
But that wasn't the end of the fighting, the 2006 July war.
Right. Disputes lingered, like over the Sheba farms. Hezbollah used this as a pretext for continued hostility. In July 2006, Hezbollah ambushed an Israeli patrol, killing 8 soldiers and capturing 2. They likely thought Israel was preoccupied with Hamas.
And Israel's reaction.
Swift and massive. They perhaps saw it as an excuse to destroy Hezbollah, encouraged by the U.S. war on terror narrative. Blockade, airstrikes on Beirut airport and Hezbollah HQs, a ground invasion. Hezbollah fired over 100 rockets a day into Israel for 34 days.
What was the outcome?
A UN ceasefire in August. Huge devastation in Lebanon. Over 1,000 civilians dead, 1 million homeless. Israel lost 118 soldiers, 40 civilians. Hezbollah claimed a hollow victory. Israel suffered a rare taste of defeat, its image of invincibility dented. The bombing caused immense civilian damage and actually increased support for Hezbollah. Amnesty International confirmed Israel used white phosphorus shells.
Another devastating conflict was the Iran-Iraq War, 1980-88. Why did Iraq invade Iran?
Saddam Hussein had several motives. Firstly, fear. He feared Khomeini's fundamentalist Shiite Islamic revolution spreading from Iran into Iraq, which had its own large Shia minority. He'd executed Iraqi Shia leaders, leading to border raids.
And territorial claims, too.
Yes, Iraq claimed Iran's Khuzestan province, mostly Arab-populated, hoping for their support. And there was the long-standing dispute over the Shadal and Arab Waterway, a vital oil export route that Iran had previously forced Iraq to share.
And Saddam thought it would be easy.
He did. A major miscalculation. He believed Iran's forces would be weak and demoralized after the revolution. He expected a quick victory.
But the war dragged on horrifically.
It did. Iran organized mass infantry attacks, often human wave attacks, against heavily fortified Iraqi positions. Iraq had Soviet tanks and weapons, but Iranian Revolutionary Guards, fueled by religious fervor and seeking martyrdom, fought with fanatical determination. Iran even acquired modern equipment secretly from the USA, China, and North Korea.
So it became more than just territory.
Much more. A deeper racial and religious conflict. Khomeini vowed to destroy Saddam's godless regime. Iraq focused on strangling Iranian oil exports. Iran captured Iraqi territory, threatening Basra.
What were the international repercussions?
Huge threat to regional stability. Conservative Arab states backed Iraq. Syria, Libya, Algeria, South Yemen, and the PLO actually criticized Iraq for diverting attention from Israel. Attacks on oil exports threatened Western energy supplies, drawing U.S., Russian, British, French warships to the Gulf. Mines were laid. Even Syria got alarmed by Iranian success, fearing Iraq would split up and become another Lebanon.
How did it finally end?
By late 1987, both sides were bombing each other's capitals. Thousands dead. The sheer economic and human cost was unbearable. Both sides finally looked for a way out. The UN intervened, arranged a ceasefire in August 1988. Surprisingly, it held. Peace negotiations were agreed in 1990.
But Saddam wasn't done. Even before those peace terms were final, he invaded Kuwait in August 1990.
Unbelievable timing, wasn't it? His main motive was clear. Seize Kuwait's valuable oil wells and wealth. Iraq was crippled financially after the war with Iran.
Did he have other justifications?
He claimed Kuwait was historically part of Iraq, ignoring its long status as a British protectorate. He also seemed to believe the world wouldn't react strongly, given his large army, previous Western arms supplies, and the fact the U.S. had previously tolerated his brutal suppression of Shias and Kurds within Iraq.
Another miscalculation.
A massive one. U.S. President George H.W. Bush led immediate international efforts to remove Iraq. The UN imposed tough trade sanctions, issued an ultimatum for withdrawal by January 15, 1991.
And figures like Bush and Margaret Thatcher were determined.
Absolutely. They feared Saddam controlling such a large portion of the world's oil. Crucially, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Egypt also supported UN action. Over 30 nations contributed to an international coalition force of over 600,000 troops.
Operation Desert Storm.
When the deadline passed, the campaign began. Phase 1. Massive bombing of Baghdad and military targets. Phase 2. The ground attack on February 24th. Within 4 days, the Iraqis were driven out of Kuwait and routed.
What happened afterwards?
Kuwait was liberated. Saddam accepted defeat. But despite huge Iraqi casualties, maybe 90,000 dead compared to less than 400 allies, Saddam was allowed to withdraw with much of his army intact. Bush called a ceasefire, partly to maintain Arab support in the coalition.
But then Saddam crushed internal uprisings.
Ruthlessly. Shia Muslims in the south, Kurds in the north. Initially, the Allies didn't intervene, concerned about Iraq breaking up or Iranian influence. Eventually, global outrage led the U.S. and Britain to declare no-fly zones, but Saddam Hussein stayed in power.
Which revealed something about Western motives.
The source suggested showed motives were primarily self-interest oil, regional stability rather than purely international justice.
Okay, let's circle back to the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, or lack thereof. The Oslo Accords seemed promising, but ultimately failed. Why?
Several factors, according to Lowe. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, elected in '96, apparently never fully accepted Oslo. He backtracked on commitments, allowed large Jewish settlements near Jerusalem, which really alienated Palestinians.
And leaders.
Ehud Barak, elected in '99, promised a renewed drive for peace, even involving Syria. But Syrian talks broke down over borders. He did withdraw Israeli troops from southern Lebanon in 2000. But on Jerusalem, Barak offered to share sovereignty, while Arafat insisted on full Palestinian sovereignty in East Jerusalem. That remained a huge sticking point.
Clinton tried one last time.
Yes. A U.S.-sponsored summit at Camp David in July 2000 failed. His final peace plan in December 2000 proposed an independent Palestinian state, Gaza. 95% of the West Bank, East Jerusalem as capital. It came tantalizingly close at talks in Taba in January 2001, but ultimately foundered again on the critical issue of Jerusalem.
Jerusalem just seems insurmountable.
It holds such immense symbolic and emotional significance for both sides. Jews view it as their ancient capital, site of the Temple Mount. Muslims revere it as Al-Haram al-Sharif, site of Prophet Muhammad's ascension.
And the history of its division.
The UN originally planned for it to be international. The 1948 war left East Jerusalem under Jordan, West Jerusalem under Israel. Israel captured East Jerusalem in 1967 and still occupies it.
And Israel's actions there drew condemnation.
Yes, building new Jewish settlements on Arab land, violating international law. The 1980 Jerusalem law declaring a complete and unified Jerusalem as Israel's capital drew widespread criticism, even U.S. abstention. Leaders seemed to abandon any idea of a divided capital.
Then came Ariel Sharon and the Al-Aqsa Intifada in 2000.
Right. Sharon's highly publicized visit to Temple Mount on September 28, 2000 was seen by many Palestinians as a deliberate provocation. It triggered widespread riots and a full-scale uprising, the Al-Aqsa Intifada.
And Sharon's approach as prime minister.
Hardline. Elected in February 2001, he announced no further negotiations during violence. His policy combined tough military action, including building that controversial protective wall around the West Bank, which trapped Palestinian villages and incorporated Jewish settlements with international pressure.
Leading to that awful cycle of violence.
Exactly. Hamas suicide bombings, followed by massive Israeli retaliations, airstrikes, assassinations, Israeli occupation of Palestinian areas like Ramallah and the Jenin refugee camp. A UN report in September 2002 charged Israel with causing a humanitarian catastrophe in the occupied territories.
And Arafat was sidelined.
Increasingly. The U.S. and Israel saw him as an obstacle, refused to meet him, demanded a new leader. Mahmoud Abbas was appointed prime minister in March 2003, but Arafat remained the real power behind the scenes.
This led to another plan, the Roadmap for Peace in 2003.
Yes, developed by the Quartet, EU, Russia, UN, USA. Launched in April 2003, aiming for an independent, democratic Palestinian state by the end of 2005.
What were its key provisions?
Unconditional end to violence, a freeze on new Israeli settlements, dismantling illegal settlements built since March 2001, new Palestinian constitution and elections, and eventual talks on the final status issues: settlements, refugees, Jerusalem, borders.
And crucially, Sharon's government accepted it in principle.
Narrowly, yes. His cabinet voted in favor, which meant countenancing a Palestinian state, including some occupied territory, first for him. He made that historic statement: to keep 3.5 million people under occupation is bad for us and for them. We have to reach a peace agreement.
Why the change of heart from Sharon?
Several reasons suggested by the source. His hardline policy wasn't actually stopping Palestinian resistance. Public opinion was shifting. Disproportionate Israeli responses made Palestinians seem like underdogs, horrifying moderate Israelis. U.S. pressure was increasing, with Bush losing patience and threatening aid cuts. And importantly, demographics: Palestinian Arabs could soon outnumber Jews, threatening Israel's character if they had equal rights. A two-state solution started to look like the only way to preserve a democratic and Jewish state.
But again, despite that potential shift, the roadmap stalled.
Completely. By spring 2004, basically none of its points had been implemented. Violence continued. An unofficial Geneva Accords plan emerged, offering concessions like a divided Jerusalem and abandoning many settlements. But it required Palestinians to give up the right of return for refugees.
Which was unacceptable to most Palestinians.
Absolutely. And abandoning settlements was anathema to many Israelis. Stalemate again.
Why did the roadmap itself fail so quickly? What were the key weaknesses?
The source points to several. It lacked real acknowledgement of Israel's illegal occupation of Gaza and the West Bank since 1967. Using terms like provisional frontiers fueled Palestinian fears of fragmented enclaves.
And the settlement issue wasn't fully addressed.
No. It only mentioned dismantling illegal settlements built after March 2001. That ignored nearly 200 earlier settlements, housing about 450,000 people, which were also arguably illegal under international law.
And the wall.
No mention of the massive 347-kilometer security wall, cutting deep into Palestinian lands, trapping around 300,000 Palestinians. The International Court of Justice ruled it illegal in July 2004, but Sharon rejected the ruling.
And the refugee issue.
Still the core problem. The right of return for pre-1948 refugees wasn't addressed sufficiently for Palestinians, while for Israelis, allowing it was seen as potentially destroying the Jewish state.
So Sharon moved towards unilateral actions.
Yes. He announced plans to withdraw from some Gaza settlements, but keep most West Bank ones. President Bush gave unqualified support, stating a full Israeli withdrawal or Palestinian refugee return was unrealistic. This provoked Arab outrage. Israeli assassinations of Hamas leaders like Sheikh Ahmed Yassin further inflamed tensions.
Then Yasser Arafat died in late 2004.
Yes, December 2004. Mahmoud Abbas, seen as a moderate, was elected president in January 2005. Bush signaled willingness to meet him. Israelis did withdraw from Gaza in 2005, but crucially, they still controlled its borders, airspace, and sea access, effectively isolating it.
And Hamas gained power.
By late 2005, Abbas looked weak. Hamas won the Palestinian legislative elections in January 2006. Israel refused further peace talks with what it called terrorists. Then violence erupted between Fatah and Hamas, a Palestinian civil war in 2007, splitting Palestine into a Fatah-ruled West Bank and Hamas-ruled Gaza.
And Israel intensified the Gaza blockade.
Yes, creating a severe humanitarian crisis by 2008. A 6-month truce in June 2008, meant to stop rockets in exchange for easing the blockade, failed. Conditions in Gaza worsened. After Israel violated the truce, Hamas launched rockets,
leading to Operation Cast Lead.
Israel launched a major air attack in December 2008, followed by a ground invasion. The damage in Gaza was described as indiscriminate and disastrous. Hospitals, schools, homes, food supplies destroyed. Over 1,000 Palestinians and 13 Israelis were killed. Amnesty International again confirmed Israel used white phosphorus.
And the blockade continued after that.
Yes. Despite widespread international criticism, UK Prime Minister David Cameron famously called Gaza a prison camp in July 2010. Egypt partially opened its border crossing after Mubarak resigned in 2011, but Israeli air attacks on Gaza in November 2012, retaliating for rockets, killed over 160 Palestinians and 5 Israelis, with no commitment from Israel to end the blockade. So, as we've really seen throughout this discussion, the modern Middle East is just this incredibly complex mosaic of deeply interconnected conflicts. It's driven by a mix of pan-Arab aspirations, deep historical grievances, constant external interventions, competition over strategic resources like oil, and these very deeply held religious and national identities.
Yeah, it's overwhelming sometimes. From that dream of Arab unity to the ongoing, just tragic Israeli-Palestinian conflict and this devastating wars like Iran, Iraq, or Lebanon, each event leaves its mark, doesn't it? Reshaping alliances, creating new challenges. It really feels like a region where the past is never truly past.
That's a very good way to put it. We've talked about numerous attempts at peace. The Arab League, Camp David, Oslo, the Roadmap. Yet, despite all these efforts, different leaders, changing geopolitics, the promise of lasting peace, particularly between Israelis and Palestinians, it just remains so elusive.
Which leads us to our final thought for you, our listener. Why, after all this history, all the lessons seemingly learned, all the immense suffering on all sides, why do fundamental issues like the status of Jerusalem and the Palestinian right of return continue to be such powerful obstacles to any true resolution? What will it actually take for that deep religious gulf, as our source puts it, to finally somehow be bridged?